All right, good afternoon, and thank you for joining me. So, today, before I continue with my story playthrough, I wanted to take some time to take a look at the Guild Wars 2 2023 roadmap, which they introduced a few days ago earlier in the week. So, I hadn't really got a chance, because of how the week was going, to really take a look at it and give it some thought. When they released it, I had scanned over it briefly, and it obviously it sounded very exciting, and I think for a lot of people at first look, it did definitely seem exciting. And then as the week went on, and it started, there were some other voices starting to emerge. I don't know what that looked like in the forums. I don't know what that looked like in the subreddit. I really
It
don't spend
feels
a lot of
beyond shame
time
or
on either one of those. Um, but on like the YouTube side, I started to see some videos pop up and stuff, and so I was once I got the opportunity on Friday evening to kind of take a look at it, there was some kind of interesting stuff there that I think bears a second look, because I think when you initially take a look at what they were saying, it sounds really exciting, really appealing. It sounds like something that we definitely should look forward to. Um, and I, once you kind of break down what they're saying, I don't know if that's the case or not. And of course, it was also packaged as something new. This is the new thing. And honestly, I think when we really take a look at it, there's nothing new about it. Now, I do want to kind of caveat and say that I love the game. I play the game, quite a bit, and I mess around on different accounts and kind of goof off with this YouTube thing and Twitch thing and so forth. So yeah, I don't want to then like sit here and like doomsday the game and make it out like um, that this announcement is the end of Guild Wars 2. This announcement is not the end of Guild Wars 2. This announcement is not the end of me playing Guild Wars 2, and probably would not be the end of most people playing Guild Wars 2. I don't think that that's what's taking place here. What I do think is taking place is that maybe the future we're looking at is similar to one we've already seen, and was one or will be one going forward, that might result in there being some times when given the choice between playing Guild Wars 2 and Cyberpunk 2077 and Stellaris and some of the other stuff I enjoy, that maybe Guild Wars 2 will not be the first thing I go to, whereas right now it is. Again, that's not to say that like it's a disaster for the game or that the game is bad. Just that depending on how some of what they talk about manifests, I don't know what it means for the game. So let's take a look at it, right? Let's take a look at what they actually said. So this came out on Monday, if I'm not mistaken, a few days ago. It's Saturday now, so it came out a few days ago. So hello, Guild Wars 2 community. Before our holiday break, we wrapped up 2022 by reflecting on what a fantastic year it was for Guild Wars 2. And then they go on. I'm not going to read every single word of the of the studio update, because quite frankly, like, if you care, it's very easy to find, and you can read it. So in many cases, I'm going to provide a synopsis. So the first paragraph is basically a description of all the accolades that the game received in calendar year 2022. And these are true things. 2022 might have been the best year that Guild Wars 2 has had since launch year. Now, I'm saying that without looking at any numbers. I'm not looking at sales numbers. I'm not looking at numbers of active players, which ArenaNet never releases anyway. But just in terms of um, the way the game has felt, with it feels populated. It feels like there are new players embracing content. It feels like the content we received with End of Dragons, has mostly been good. Um, the Suwon meta, notwithstanding, I think that was pretty divisive for the community, and that's was should not surprise anybody, and that's a completely separate conversation.
Congratulations to me.
But overall, a really strong year. So then they go on to say, hey, we closed the December studio update with a promise we'd be back in 2023 to talk about our long-term plans for Guild Wars 2. And so that's, thus the introduction for the meat and potatoes of this post. What is it that we're actually, going to talk about? These things. Okay, cool. So the next portion, the next 3 paragraphs, are defining the problem. Okay. All right, so you just told me that this was the best year the Guild Wars 2 has had in a decade or whatever. Well, that's really good. Now, admittedly, they didn't say that. I'm inserting the best year in a decade. But you just told me what a fantastic year it's been for Guild Wars 2. Now, defining the problem. So, I guess if you're about to tell the Guild Wars 2 community that on the heels of a fantastic year, you're going to overhaul the way the game's release system works, or the release cadence and what you're releasing and when you're releasing it, then I guess you better define a problem, right? Because you just kind of suggested that there is no problem. I would say, if I ran any sort of business, whether it was a gaming studio or whether it was a bakery or a waste disposal company, like insert for-profit business here, or even not for profit. If I was coming off of a fantastic year, I'd better be sure that there was a problem before I start making significant changes. Now, I don't work for ArenaNet. I don't know what's going on inside their building. I don't know what challenges the studio. It may be that they had this fantastic year in spite of some very specific challenges. And presumably that's what we're going to hear about in these next 3 paragraphs, right? But it's such a... And it doesn't seem, when you're initially reading it, it doesn't seem like this weird transition, right? Because, it's a relatively well-written blog or press release or whatever you want to refer to it as. So, but if you actually take a step back, like, that's kind of weird. Okay, so defining the problem. What then is the problem? Since 2021, we put a renewed emphasis on developing Guild Wars 2 with a player-centric approach, where step 1 in our development process is to seek out and understand the problems and frustrations that MMO players face. This approach was first adopted at ArenaNet over 20 years ago and is at the core of the continued success of the Guild Wars franchise. Okay, so the first paragraph of the defining the problem portion there, I'm fine with. I think there were some things that we normally associate with MMORPGs that ArenaNet really did in their development of Guild Wars to make a concerted effort to take into consideration and to fix when possible. For example, there's some games where if I got to farm these worms over here, for a drop, and another player is looking for the same drop, and this player's here and I'm here. In most games, that player and I kill this plains worm hatchling. One of us will get the loot, right? And there's like a loot roll system and stuff like that, and that's pretty common. Well, Guild Wars 2 doesn't do that, right? That player and I can then collaborate, and if we each land a hit on the planesworm hatchling there, then we both stand to potentially get loot. We'll both each independently have a loot roll, so it's not like you get loot from every single enemy. I'm killing 2 bandits right now. Am I going to get loot from both? I got loot from none, right? So there was still a loot roll that took place. but our loot roll happens independently of each other, so we don't have to compete for that. And generally, ArenaNet has done a pretty good job of um, not forcing players to compete with each other. And I really appreciate that, because I don't enjoy some of the behavior that comes along with players competing with each other in that way. Um, you know, during my 0 to 0 playthrough, I mentioned the Coiled Watch event and how it was necessary for what was it? It was season 2, right? Advancement of the season 2 story. It was tied into this greater event chain, and you needed to complete the event chain and get down and fight these bosses and stuff. But that event also, if scaled up significantly, produced a number of champions, and if you failed the event, it would proc again relatively quickly, and so it actually turned out that the most profitable thing for that event to happen was for it to fail, which is kind of bad design. And then the players that wanted to complete it, so that they could advance the story, ended up in direct conflict with the players who wanted it to fail repeatedly so that they could farm it. Okay, that's not good, but that's a rarity, right? Those things have happened, and generally ArenaNet then looks to address it, change the event somehow, or do something to kind of avoid a situation where the players are in conflict. So to come back to the roadmap, when they say that historically they have made an effort to avoid some of the pitfalls that other similar games might have experienced, I think there is definitely credibility to their saying that. So the next paragraph. The conclusion of the Elder Dragon saga, a story told over the course of a decade, was an opportunity for our team to reflect on our past before moving forward. We evaluated what has and hasn't worked over the years and used those insights to redefine how we develop and release content for our players. Our goals for the next phase of Guild Wars 2 are simple. We want to deliver content updates in a more timely and consistent manner, and we want to provide better support for the wide variety of systems and game modes that make up the Guild Wars 2 experience. Okay. I mostly am on board with what is being said here. At my most cynical, I would question them evaluating what has and hasn't worked over the years, and then using those insights to redefine how they develop and release content. Simply because that's something that if you're um, if you've been playing the game for a long time, if you're a big fan of the game, and you've been playing since launch or playing since beta or even playing since the first couple years, you might feel like that's not something that historically they've been good at. I do not feel that it's something that historically they've been good at. While they do a good job of trying to avoid some of the pitfalls that other similar games might experience, some of the pitfalls that they naturally have stumbled upon, or some of the mistakes that they seem to have made in the past, they seem to repeatedly make. And one of the most egregious is aspiring, having some sort of lofty goal, and then failing to reach it. That is a mistake that ArenaNet has repeatedly made. So, okay, like I hear what you're saying, ArenaNet, but again, at my most cynical, I have a trust problem with this because historically, it hasn't worked out. And we've been given this speech before. Every few years we get a speech where we're looking at the systems and the way they've been working, and then it'll result in a reorganization of how they write their living world or how they develop instance content. Our dungeons team is now our fractals team, is now our raids team, and we have 3 different teams working on living world content, a la season 4, I believe it was, where that was the case. And it really seems to show as each living world season seems to feel, in terms of like the actual things, like how that living world season played, how the currencies worked, how the resource nodes worked on the maps and stuff were different from chapter to chapter within that singular season, and it's like, whoa, how much independence did they give these different teams? I mean, they implemented completely different systems. Like, that is super weird, right? So, again, at my most cynical, I would say we've heard this all before, and I don't like hearing it again, because historically, every time I've been told this, we've seen some upheaval within the company, and it hasn't necessarily resulted in a better product. It's resulted in mostly the same product, maybe just packaged up a slightly different way. And is that what we're getting again? I don't know. Now, if instead of being at my most cynical, I'm at my most optimistic, I can say, well, you've told me that you have a problem, or you're telling me, we're in the process of that section. You're telling me that you have a problem. So okay, maybe this is just them acknowledging that in the past they've done this and it hasn't worked out. So this time they mean it. This time they're serious about making like changes that are actually going to substantively impact how they develop, how they release, they refine their product that they are. I don't want to say giving to us, because they're not giving it to us. They are selling it to us, and that's what they're supposed to do. Like, let's not like I saw someone praising Guild Wars 2 the other day because they don't steal a subscription fee. Nobody steals a subscription fee. Hulu does not steal a subscription fee. Final Fantasy XIV does not steal a subscription fee. Nothing that requires, if you're still subscribing to an actual paper copy of Sports Illustrated, they're not stealing the subscription. Pay it or don't, dude. And then you either get what, you get what you paid for, and if it's not a satisfactory product, then stop subscribing. This is a business, and it's a business for ArenaNet too. They don't have a sub fee, but they do sell us a product, and this new this new release system and this new content development system is going to be what defines whether or not we buy that product. So I guess if there's a problem with it, fix it, and then you're either gonna it's either gonna work out or it's not. But at my most optimistic, they're finally acknowledging that there is some work that needs to be done. And so, like if I'm, as a soldier, if I do a bad job of Battle Drill 1 Alpha once, I say, well, I got to get better at this. And then I do a bad job the second time. Well, I got to get better at this. Well, you might hear me continue to say, I got to get better at this. Until finally, after repetition and developing the muscle memory and so on and so forth, one day I get better at it. So that would be me at my most optimistic. To say, okay, ArenaNet, they're still trying. At my most optimistic, I would say, coming off such a great year, they could simply do the same thing over and over, and be profitable. I think, because they, I would assume this was a profitable year for them if it went that well, and I would assume if 2022 went so well, that should lead to profitability in 2023 also, right? But okay, let's be optimistic and say, okay, they're going to continue to improve. Next paragraph. The conclusion of the Elder Dragon saga, a story told over the course of a decade. Nope, sorry. That was the paragraph we just finished. My bad. Third paragraph. Having the development bandwidth needed to iterate on core systems is especially important to us, and it's something that we've been making headway on over the last year with our Quality of Life Improvement Initiative. There's so many systems in Guild Wars 2 that have good bones, and they can be even better with just a bit of love. Okay, I'm all about that, because I 100% agree. I think for all the things that ArenaNet does poorly, and that there are few, none more egregious than just bad management. The the management, like you have a certain number of people, the ability to employ them correctly, and the business acumen to monetize that seems to be abysmal. If we are to believe what we see from the outside looking in terms of how things work for ArenaNet. And that may speak to something, to the fact that their public relations is also not very good. So in part, we're led to believe that because we never know any different. Um, but they do have good bones. I don't know that there is and this is super subjective, but at least for me, for my money, I don't know that there are that many MMORPGs that are really better looking. I think it's a beautiful game. I'm not speaking exclusively of graphics, but the combination of the graphics capability and then how the actual art style works, and the world that they've created, the beauty of Tyria and so forth. It is a fantastic looking, like sometimes it just feels like super artistic. Now maybe here in Queensdale, like this is not like the optimal example, but there are some places in Pathfire and End of Dragons and so forth that are really kind of works of art to hang out in. Like the Tetrahedron in Crystal Desert. Um, the entire map for Saitung is really very cool and lovely. So that's a huge thing that the studio has going for them. I think the combat system's very good. To me, Final Fantasy XIV felt very slow. Elder Scrolls Online feels slow-ish, but also feels a little bit limited. Like you can do a little bit less. Um, Black Desert Online felt like super like button spammy to me. I in PvP I felt like I never had a chance because I didn't know what I was doing. But in all the in everything else, I felt like if I just kind of like rolled my face around on the keyboard, I was going to kill like 77 foes. So there's like this weird, huge disconnect there. Now, admittedly, I was probably bad at all these games because I never played any of them as much as Guild Wars 2, and I'm not even very good at Guild Wars 2. So, take those things with a grain of salt. But just the same, like I think the combat system in Guild Wars 2 is fantastic. Some things like traits and the skills and so forth, like those things have gone through multiple iterations. So maybe the studio's reached a point now where they feel like, yeah, we've totally, like, this is exactly where we want it now. Maybe it wasn't before. That's fine because it's good now. I think some of those things were relatively good at launch. I don't know that the trait system at launch was terrible. I don't know that there were like a lot of complaints about it, but it's probably better now than it was at launch, so that's great. The bottom line there is, I agree that this game has the skeleton in place. This game has the backbone to build upon if they're good custodians of the game, which would require them to improve. If they're really good custodians of the game, this is a game that could still be around for a long time, and could see multiple expansions and could be a viable product from a business standpoint, and that would generate the funds needed and afford them the time to then further develop the IP into a spin-off or an expansion or whatever the case might be, whatever direction that ends up going. If they don't take good care of Guild Wars 2, the IP will probably die, given the changes that have happened in gaming since Guild Wars 2 was initially developed, right? In the last 10 years, gaming has changed drastically. The emergence of mobile gaming, and I have my phone right next to me. I have games on my phone. I have games on my phone where from time to time I will stop playing Guild Wars 2 to check on those games. And some of them are ridiculous, and some of them are childish, and it might even be embarrassing to say, at one point in time I spent real money on gacha. that's ridiculous. But that studio made money because the product that they created was compelling enough to get me to spend my money. Um, so the landscape has completely changed, and for the Guild Wars IP to survive, they're going to have to make some adjustments too, and maybe that's what they're trying to do here. So, okay, got it, 100%. So the path forward. This is the next portion in their their studio update here. The next portion is called the path forward, and this is where we're actually going to get the meat and potatoes. They're actually going to tell us what it is that is changing and what it is that we can expect going forward for the rest of 2023 and on into the indefinite future. And as I noted a few minutes ago, we've heard this several times before. So when they tell us, hey, here's what to expect, for how long? We've done this dance before. How long before the next game director then overhauls everything again? So let's just say this is what we can expect for 2023, and just not get carried away until. And I don't mean that with any disrespect to the current game director who signs this studio update at the end. It's Josh Davis, who is, from everything that I have seen, well respected and well liked by the Guild Wars 2 community, because the fans of the game feel that he's a straight shooter, that he's honest, that he's willing to acknowledge if the game's not doing things that again, the thing I said a second ago, like honest, like I think fans of Guild Wars 2 are really craving that out of the studio. So he has the reputation of being those things. So this isn't meant to to disparage him or to question whether or not that reputation is earned, and whether or not he'll live up to it. Only to say that history is what we have to work with, right? And history tells me that this big plan is going to last for 24 to 36 months. So we'll see. The path forward for 2023, at least. The first step toward accomplishing these goals was to rebalance how we allocate our development resources across the project. That's happened numerous times. Historically, with few exceptions, Living World seasons have required the focus of nearly the entire Guild Wars 2 development team to deliver them at the size, quality, and cadence that our players expect. This made it difficult to simultaneously develop expansions while supporting the game with regular content updates. It also means that many areas of the game went under-supported. So I think anyone who has played Guild Wars 2 for a while can say, yeah, we know that this has been something of a problem in the past, because we have seen portions of the game go under-supported. The easy observations are like world versus world, and possibly to like a lesser degree, or in a different way, maybe not a lesser degree, but in a different way, like structured PvP. I don't think that they're ever going to change. They'll do balance patches, but I don't think they're ever actually going to change the way structured PvP works again. Like, it is what it is at this point. They're welcome to prove me wrong. I'm not a PvP player, so I don't have a personal emotional investment in that. But just looking at the game mode from the outside, I very much think that is the case.
Resume normal functioning.
In the next phase of Guild Wars 2's development, we're taking a more balanced approach that will allow us to provide more support for popular game modes, make frequent quality of life improvements to core gameplay systems like professions, deliver new features, and expand the world of Tyria with satisfying immersive story updates. Okay. I mean, that's good. I want those things for the game. Those were already the expectations that we had as a community. I think the only thing that paragraph changes in terms of my expectations is that normally I would not expect ArenaNet to do all those things simultaneously, because historically they've not shown the ability to do those things simultaneously. But they try to do most all those things. the problem was not that they wanted to make, that they didn't want to make improvements to the game. It was that they seemingly didn't want to make improvements to certain portions of the game. So if in fact this statement is all-encompassing, then that would be a great thing. But there's still, so either it's all-encompassing or it's not. And if it's not all-encompassing, then so what would all-encompassing be, I guess, is the question, right? When you say that you want to continue, improvement in all areas of the game while still giving us new story and improving various game modes and so forth, well, we know that doesn't include dungeons. So I guess just that's fine. Like what that's any changes to dungeons would be an unrealistic expectation at this time. They unified the dungeon currency, and if you were like an outrageous optimist, you could say that actually paves the way for more dungeon development because it simplifies certain things. I would argue the opposite. I would say that is the final step in just putting dungeons onto like autopilot, which is fine. Like again, we've known this for a long time. But what about raids? Like are those completely replaced by strikes now? And we'll kind of have some more indications on that here, real soon. But like, and does the raiding community like is there a raiding community? I don't know. I was never part of it, so I wouldn't know. Like, is it alive? I think it is. There seems to be a lot of LFG posts for it. Most of those are ads for like selling raids, but just the same, like, I assume somebody's buying those raid runs if if someone's selling them, right? So if you're telling me that you're going to continue to develop new content, improve existing content, and improve the systems of the game, which ones? So I don't know. Later on here, pretty soon in their statement, we'll kind of get some indications on that because they're going to tell us like what they're going to continue bringing to the game, and maybe I don't know if it's everything that you would want to hear or not. But let's take a look. Okay, so the next paragraph. Our future expansions for Guild Wars 2 will be the backbone of this new approach. Okay, makes sense. When we're talking about overhauls, it's worth noting, though, that on the game's release, they said there would not be such thing as expansions. That Living World was going to be 100% how the game progressed. Now, obviously, like that's in the distant past, right? And we know the game has changed, and in retrospect, we can say, like, probably it was for the best that they went to the expansion system. But since we're talking about overhauls to how the game releases content, and they're saying, well, we're going to change the way we do expansions, let's not forget that expansions themselves represented an overhaul in how they release content. Those were not part of the game's original vision. Okay. Rather than launching an expansion every 2 to 4 years with a season of Living World in between, we'll be releasing smaller expansions more frequently at a slightly reduced price and adding additional content for those expansions through quarterly updates, meaning that the next big release is only ever a few months away. At this point, I think this is where people got really excited. And I think people were justified in getting really excited because that sounds really good. And in theory, it will be really good. That's that's awesome, right? Like, yes, please, give me more expansions. It's the later paragraph. Already we should be asking our question. Well, what are we actually getting then? Because you just told me in an earlier paragraph that like it was a struggle to do Living World and work on expansions and improve the game and polish different things and develop systems and so forth. You told me that you couldn't do that, or that it was a significant struggle. So if you're going to give me more regular expansions, then what's the give and take? and what are the implications of that? What am I actually getting when I pay for these expansions? So they're going to be more regular, right? Um, but it also said smaller. We'll be releasing smaller expansions more frequently. Okay, at a slightly reduced price, and then adding additional content for those expansions through quarterly updates. So at this point, let's go ahead and say, well, so uh, additional content to those expansions through quarterly updates. That does appear to be something different than Living World. So, Living World is dead. Long live Living World, right? So now we're just calling it part of the expansion. I think what that actually is, and this is confirmed elsewhere. I can't remember where I saw it. I can't remember if I saw it in like I think it was in actually a like gaming magazine article online about this. I don't think it's in this exact studio update, though it may be. We'll stumble across it if it is. But they did confirm that purchasing the expansion automatically includes all those quarterly updates. So there's no longer the obligation to log in for Living World. That's interesting to me. I don't have a problem with it at all. I mean, and no one should, because you get what you pay for. So if you know that you're paying for the expansion with all of its DLC, then you get that, like, then you should be happy, right? And maybe that's why some folks didn't like the I have to log in to get the Living World. I also didn't have a problem with that, though. Like, that was it was how they were choosing to market it, and I don't know. I guess I can see how it'd be off-putting if I was new to the game and like Heart of Thorns and Path of Fire were already out, and I bought Heart of Thorns and Path of Fire thinking that I now had everything leading up to a certain point, and then that turned out to not be the case. I guess that would be off-putting. So, okay, I'm on board. It's kind of the least of our concerns, as we'll find out, going forward. So the next paragraph: the first release in an expansion cycle is the launch point for a new story arc, bringing with it 2 new open-world maps, 2 strike missions, new gameplay and combat features, new masteries, and new rewards. In the following quarterly updates, we'll add another open-world map, additional story chapters, challenge modes for the strike missions, a new fractal dungeon and challenge mode, new rewards, and additions to the new systems introduced in that expansion. Once the expansion story is complete, the next expansion will be just around the corner. Alright, so this is obviously the paragraph that tells us what we're actually going to be getting. It is the paragraph that people are most spun up about, and it's also the paragraph that I think probably deserves the most scrutiny, because I think on the first read, it's a little bit deceiving. It sounds like I'm getting one thing, and I think we're actually getting something else. So I want to go back and kind of take a look at, okay, what are we or are we not getting here? So let's do that. Sentence by sentence. First release an expansion cycle. So this is going to be a cycle, it's going to repeat itself, and immediately, like, and this is kind of encapsulated here in another sentence or two, but I think people are largely reading this as a 1-year cycle, and I would really encourage people to like throttle back on that. I don't believe it's going to be a 1-year cycle. I don't believe it's any. I'm expecting about an 18-month cycle, which is still great in a sense, in a manner of speaking. But for whatever reason, everyone I've definitely heard folks talking about it like it's a yearly cycle, and I'm not convinced that that's going to be the case. So, new story arc. So every 12 to 18 months, depending on how you interpret, what they're saying here and how often we think that's going to be. It also doesn't, is it really going to be just a quarter? like quarterly thing between the end of one expansion cycle and the beginning of a next. Like I think that's is it? I have a hard time believing it. I really have a hard time believing that. But okay.
It isn't like cream. Good
Um,
ones rise to the top.
a new story arc each time. So what we're definitely not going to see then is like the the real slow burn on like the Elder Dragons thing as a whole. Obviously lasted for 10 years, right? But even within the Living World seasons, like some things definitely lasted longer than a year. So Kralkatorrik, for example, was um, that stretched over a period of time. I don't recall if it was over a year or not. How many chapters of season 4 actually were dedicated exclusively to Kralkatorrik? Because we knew Kralkatorrik was a problem, but then we also like took a little detour to deal with Palawajoko. So I don't know. That's open to some debate, right? But um, can we get good story on a year-to-year basis, on a cyclical basis like that? Like, are those stories going to be well told if they are 4 or 5 chapters long or whatever the case may be? Like, um, or are they going to be like? Are we really just getting like the serial comic book? Because I've always felt their storytelling was shallow. I've always felt it was very comic booky. Are they actually like fully embracing that and going that direction? So what does it mean for the story? What does it mean for some of the substance we're getting as well? So upon release, 2 open world maps. Okay, well that's significantly less than we would normally associate with the expansion. But then we're supposed to be getting more as time goes on, and we're getting these expansions more regularly. So probably forgivable. But we are going to revisit that idea. 2 strike missions, so 1 per map. That's probably consistent. Like that feels. I'm not a huge strike mission guy, but I feel like with End of Dragons we got about 1 strike mission per map. And strikes were introduced in um, Icebrood Saga, and we got several strikes. And there were several maps. So that sounds more or less about right. I don't see a significant change there. New gameplay and combat features. I don't know what that means. Because that sounds like masteries, but then the next thing they say is new masteries. So I don't know. That sounds like that's a super, super ambiguous thing. New gameplay and combat features. Like what? That's like like I'm trying to get a date and I say, well, I do really nice things. Okay, like what? What do you do that's really nice? You're a nice guy. Like who cares? Well, new gameplay and combat features. Well, who cares? Is that a mastery? Is it an elite spec? Because I'll tell you what we didn't hear there. Elite specs. It said nothing about elite specs at all. And that's what the community knows when you say new combat features. If you say to me new combat features coming with an expansion, my assumption is that what you mean is an elite spec. But if I'm talking to someone who knows the game, what terminology am I going to use when I say elite spec? I'm going to say elite spec. And they 100% do not say that. So I don't know what new gameplay and combat features is. I have a sneaking suspicion that it's absolutely nothing at all. It feels like just an ambiguous catch-all term that's used to convince me that things are happening in my favorite game, even if I don't know what those things are. Alright, fine. New masteries, it does say. Okay, so I do want to... We'll come back to the elite spec thing here in a minute, but I do want to take a look at the new mastery thing. We have 2 maps upon the release of these mini expansions or expansion lights or... Oh, we finished that. Or whatever whatever you want to refer to this system as. 2 maps at launch. How many masteries are we getting? How many masteries are we getting that are relevant in 2 maps? Because even all the way back to the start of the mastery system in Heart of Thorns, where I thought they did as good a job as, well, they did a pretty good job when they rolled out masteries. Most masteries felt substantive, but there are definitely a few hidden within those mastery tracks that kind of feel a little bit like filler or that feel a little bit less substantive, right? Um, I don't know if we can look at him on this. Yeah, we can't look at him on this character because I'm playing around with this alt, leveling this alt. But um, not all of them are super substantive. Now, Path of Fire, yeah, with the mounts, by and large, they all felt pretty substantive, right? Whether or not mounts were good, another conversation we'll have another time because I would love to have that conversation. But they certainly changed the game, and there was certainly a lot there. So Masteries and Path of Fire, outstanding. Masteries and End of Dragons were interesting. Fishing is an interesting thing. The skiffs are fine, but honestly, that could have been a singular mastery instead of an entire mastery track. I mean, the depth charges are really only used for Leviathan. They seem to not have any use outside of that. The ability to make my skiff faster, like, I mean, I guess, but, like, why wasn't it so did you just slow my skiff down in the first place? Or, like, what does that mean, But I guess I've enhanced my mastery of the skiff, and thus I can go faster. And then some of the other masteries are really related to fishing and not to the skiff itself. They put a lot of their stock into fishing. So masteries in the End of Dragons, fine, but didn't measure up to Heart of Thorns or Path of Fire. And then you got Icebird Saga. And I just finished my 0-0 playthrough, and for that, there was only one mastery in End of Dragons and one mastery in Icebird Saga that I felt was a worthwhile quality of life thing where we actually wanted to have it so we could enjoy gameplay. JTech Waypoint and Electromagnetic Pulse were the only two things since the release of Path of Fire that I said, hey, this affects the game in such a way that you need to dedicate the time to actually get these masters. Which means Skyscale was the last time that they released one that felt so impactful that players feel like they must go and get it. And that's because it completely broke the game in so many ways that now, if you don't have Skyscale, you can't keep up with the world boss train or whatever it is. Like, there's so many things you can't do if you don't have a Skyscale because everyone else has one. So even the urgency surrounding that one is kind of a mixed bag. Again, a different conversation for a different time. But to come back to the point, with the upcoming expansion system, is 2 maps going to really give me substantive, meaningful masteries? Or is this a system that has almost already run its course? I mean, if we're being honest with each other, has the mastery thing, like, really kind of already worn out its welcome a little bit? Or in terms of, have they already exhausted their ideas, kind of, for this? They previously had some really good ideas that they probably could have expanded on more. Like the Oakheart Reach thing. That was super cool. And it kind of just was a thing and then disappeared. And that's a shame. I want to know. I want to know just whether or not these masters are going to be good. And then finally, new rewards. That's the last thing they mentioned there in that sense. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, like, that makes sense that there would be new rewards if there's new content. Although a part of me wishes that they would stop with the new rewards. Like, part of me wishes that when I come over here to my wallet and I see all these different currencies, this is a relatively new account. This account has probably, like 120 hours on it? Maybe 125? 117. 117 hours on this account. Imagine someone who's been playing for 6 years. Look at all the different currencies they have. And this is after dungeon delving. The 8 currencies were consolidated to 1. This is after let's see, I don't have the crystals and stuff for strike missions were consolidated. We still have all this. Never mind the incredible number of materials which are added to with every little addition to the content of the game. The materials thing is a little bit more forgivable, but but the currency thing is just wearing out. It really is. So when they say new rewards, like I can kind of I can take it or leave it, right? Because the introduction of new rewards, there's a reason that they continue to add new currencies, even when it seems like there could not possibly be more currencies in the game. And it's completely psychological. Like it's the psychology of selling video games. You're going to want the new thing even more than you want more of the old thing. So we create a new thing, whether it's necessary for the game or not. Which is how, and there've been like articles written about this and stuff. So it's not like I'm the smart guy. Like it's an actual like game marketing thing that much smarter people than me are like super savvy to. So I'll let them talk about it. Bottom line, hey, we're getting new rewards. Okay, super cool. Then in the quarterly updates, and I think this is where people assume that we're getting like like a yearly cycle, is because we have the launch of the expansion cycle with the expansion, and then quarterly updates. Okay, but it doesn't say that anywhere. The first paragraph of what it means for you simply says smaller expansions more frequently. Well, more frequently than what? 4 years? Okay. And then quarterly updates. So again, 18 months, probably a much more realistic view. And it could easily be 30 months. Could 100, that is 2.5 years. That is much less than 4 years, right? So suddenly it's starting to sound like not that much is changing. But okay, let's come back to it, because there's a few more things that I like really want to hammer really hard. In the following quarterly updates, we'll add another open world map, additional story chapters, challenge modes for the strike missions, a new fractal dungeon and challenge mode, new rewards, additions to the new systems introduced. Okay. On my first read, it sounded like quarterly we would get a new fractal, another map, more chapters. And I was like, wow, that is a ton of content. So much so that I don't believe they can actually do it. Especially when you look at, like, I checked the other night. We've had like 2 new fractals added in the last 4 years. Siren's Reef and Sunqua Peak, which I continue to call Sunqua Vale because that was the name of the map in Guild Wars. But it's Sunqua Peak. In 4 years, we've got 2 new fractals. And then when I read this, my first thought is now they're saying they're going to give us new fractals quarterly, which I do believe would be potentially feasible. Like, I think they could do it if they had, if it was so important that they had the number of people dedicated to it to make that a reality, and they were willing to accept more fractals that look like urban battlegrounds and less fractals that look like chaos or shattered observatory or something like that. I don't think they are, though, and I think like super hardcore fractal folks probably don't want more urban battlegrounds either. Just as an example of like one that's pretty straightforward and doesn't have like a lot of complex design stuff.
You bring me something?
I think what this is actually saying is between the expansions, these mini expansions or expansion lights or whatever you want to call them, between the launch of each expansion cycle will be 1 new fractal, 1 new map. So now I want to take a step back again and really look at what am I actually being told here. I'm being told that I will pay slightly less, which is great. But I never thought, in fairness, I never thought ArenaNet, like, the expansions never felt like super expensive. I don't feel like this is an expensive game compared to a lot of other MMORPGs. I really don't. And if that's like an unpopular opinion or whatever, that then I guess I have to own that. But I don't think the Guild Wars 2 is a particularly expensive game. There are some things that are, that I don't think are the right price point for me, such as like the prestige mount skins. Generally, I do not buy those for myself because it's not worth $25 for me. I buy them for my daughter if she like really gets spooled up about one. But um, overall, I don't think it's like a super expensive game or that it's silly in some way
Welcome to Astoria.
in terms of their pricing. But you're telling me that more regularly, I'm going to pay slightly less for an expansion, or what we're calling an expansion now, and that's going to give me 3 maps, 1 fractal, 3, I assume, strike missions, and that's going to last over the course of an indefinite period of time, which some people are interpreting to be 12 months, but I think it's probably going to fall between 18 and 30 months. Again, they're not specifying the time, and they might be right not to specify the time, because repeatedly they have said that they're going to specify, that we will get XYZ in a certain amount of time, and they have failed almost every time. The only time I recall them meeting the time hacks that they told us was Season 3. I didn't think Season 3 was all that good from a storytelling standpoint. I think it was decent from a gameplay standpoint. And that might have been when they gave us as much as any point in time in the game was around the time of Season 3. I don't feel like we're getting that much. It's not the end of the game. It's not the end of the world. But 3 maps, 1 fractal, 2 to 3 strikes, new gameplay and combat and rewards. Well, of course. No, that was always the case. That was always the case with Living World. That was always the case with everything that was introduced to the game, and because it's an MMORPG. And no elite specs, from what we can tell. So let's now circle back, because now I'm starting to feel like we're not really getting that much. And we're starting to get a pretty clear understanding of what we're actually getting. Elite specs are really central, and have been since Heart of Thorns, the first expansion, to what defines an expansion in Guild Wars 2. Now, they probably always had something of a limited lifespan. Not just because there's only so many weapons, which is true, and for some classes they would run out of weapons sooner than others, right? Like Warrior is like only a few weapons away from being able to wield every single one of them. Engineer obviously has further to go. But, it goes without saying that the supply of weapons would, of course, impact, the elite spec thing on a long enough timeline. I think what would have threatened elite specs much sooner than running out of weapons is simply running out of new ways to do things. And I think that's always kind of been the issue. Even going back to Heart of Thorns, with the original elite specs, Dragon Hunter was like Guardian Ranger. It has bow and traps, like Ranger, but it's a Guardian. So there's always been a struggle to create something new and original and interesting. Some of them, I think, very much did that. I think Virtuoso does that. The blade thing is a completely different thing for Mesmer, so it.
Can't wait.
And you can make the argument, well, all they really did is just take away illusions and clones and whatnot from the Mesmer. Okay, well that's kind of true, but visually it's different. The gameplay is different. Like it I think it's certainly stronger as an elite spec than a lot of others. There's definitely a number of them that aren't amazing. But coming up with new ones was certainly going to be more and more of a challenge. And I don't think that the interaction with the community necessarily helped, because you really run into a struggle when the community then suggests like a really good idea, right? So there's this horrible like push-pull where if someone in the community has like this really spectacular idea, right? Let's say warrior with a staff, right? And you can like make it out like some kind of like, martial artist type thing, which would end up looking a lot like Daredevil since they did that with Daredevil. But let's say that this is packaged in like a really good way, right? Or I've always wanted I've wanted a hammer mesmer for the longest time. So let's say I package like a really cool way to do hammer mesmer. Well, Arena can't just use that outright, right? They can't just take my idea and implement it. One, because there are probably like some minor legal things that would have to be like worked out to just take my idea and run with it, just so that they don't end up having to legally answer for that later. And I actually read a news article earlier today about a studio that's kind of dealing with that. They're a real small indie studio, and I'm sure they'll get it worked out when all's said and done. But what a weird thing to have happen, right? An unfortunate thing. So you can't just take wholesale what a player gives you without at least making the proper legal accommodations to do so. But additionally, if you start taking like to that degree what players are offering you and suggesting, then you really run the risk of like kind of getting dragged by other folks within the community, right? Because now you're not like original or capable of generating new things. Like now you just are going through Reddit, finding good ideas, which I swear they've done with this story in the past anyway. I swear there are portions of Season 3 and Season 4 where they just went through Reddit, looked for what they thought were the best ideas, and then incorporated it in the story. I swear. But maybe I'm wrong. Bottom line, they shouldn't be doing that with Elite Specs either. So there was probably always going to be a point in time when Elite Specs weren't a thing anymore. I don't know if we've reached that yet or not. I really think even if it had been a little bit of a struggle, they probably could squeeze out one or two more elite specs for each class before they just straight up are done. It may be, however, that developing these elite specs is a time-consuming process. Not impossibly time-consuming, but more time-consuming than would be appropriate if you believe you can sell expansions without elite specs. If you believe you can sell 90% of the expansions without elite specs that you would have sold with them, but developing elite specs accounts for 25% of your total man hours in developing that expansion, then the responsible thing to do is to not include elite specs, right? At least for the short term. So I think probably more than anything else, if they go away from elite specs, that would probably be why it is that they made that decision, how we got to this point. I'm sure they're aware that players want them in an expansion. I do too. Not having them in future expansions would be real disappointing. And I want to, like, that's very much what I'm saying here. I don't know that it's a great idea to have future expansions without elite specs. But I can see how from a business perspective, there may come a point where you don't do them anymore because they're costing more than the amount of business that you would lose would cost, right? There may also be some other options, though, between having them and not having them. And this comes back to earlier when they said we'll get new gameplay and combat features. It may be that they're envisioning some kind of alternate system that isn't elite specs but diversifies the way we play the game and the way various classes work and so forth. I don't know what that would be. I haven't sat around to like give that a thought or come up with like super good ideas of what they should or shouldn't do. But that may be what they mean there. Is they may be acknowledging we understand that lack of elite specs is problematic, but we're going to try to fill that gap. It may also be that they're not excluding elite specs, but that we're not going to get them the same as we got them in the past. So let's say that these expansion light, or that these these baby expansions or whatever, that they do come on a yearly basis or even an 18-month basis. Although 18, the math starts to add up to be a whole lot. Let's say they come on a yearly basis, and with each of those little baby expansions, they give us elite specs for one armor weight class. So, with the first one, Mesmer, Elementalist, and Necro all get a new elite spec. With the second one, Thief, NG, and what am I forgetting? Ranger, all get a new one. And then finally, the heavy classes, Warrior, Guardian, Revenant, get another one. So over the course of 3 years, we get new elite specs. Well, that really wouldn't be that different. Getting all new elite specs over the course of 3 years wouldn't be that different from the current expansion release cadence. And so we don't experience a significant difference. Now, there certainly would be a handful of players, and it'd probably be more than a handful. So, people have very much a what about me kind of mentality. Like, yeah, that's great that you did XYZ for such and such, but like, what about me? And it's really like to the point where it can be an incredibly bad taste. Folks donating to Ukrainian refugees, and there are other folks like, well, what about Somali refugees? Well, they're no less important. Like, the fact that I gave to one charity doesn't mean I don't care about the other things. It means I made a decision on where I send my money. Like, you know, what about me? So, if they rolled out the light armor class elite specs first, certainly there would be some folks who are like, oh, well, I warrior main. How dare you? I'm a warrior main. Nobody cares, dude. I don't care what you main. ArenaNet does not care what you main. And oh, by the way, when you bought End of Dragons, I bet you got 2 level 80 boosters. And I bet you have played at least the 20 hours or so that it takes to level a character to level 80. Maybe it's a little bit more than 20. It depends on how you play. I bet you got some tomes. You probably got a few from logging in. That is a login reward. Like, man, I got like 120 level 80 characters across all my accounts. Like, if you cannot work up 3 level 80 characters, 1 for each armor class, I don't know, man. Like, maybe you're playing the wrong game. I got some great gacha games for you. So I think there are some options where they could roll out elite specs if they still want to do that, in a slower fashion, or maybe in an abbreviated fashion. And this was discussed a while back, when folks were a little concerned about whether or not elite specs were going to get introduced. I think maybe this was with Icebrood Saga, which, oh, by the way, did not have elite specs, and we'll roll back around to that in a minute. But folks were speculating that maybe there were some ways of doing elite specs that were less labor intensive, and maybe we didn't add new weapons. That would incredibly shorten the development timeline of an elite spec, right? If you don't have to come up with all the new weapon skills, all you have to do is just introduce some sort of new mechanic, right? So, as a thief here, I'm still using, daggers and pistols, but steel is replaced by something else. So it's kind of a half elite spec, right? I think that would be a viable solution. If I had to choose between a truncated elite spec like that and no elite spec, I'd take the shortened, abbreviated, truncated, whatever term you want to use. Maybe all those are incorrect, but the diminished elite spec over nothing at all, 100%. And after all, we got a lot of good weapons already available to a variety of classes. Or maybe you could revisit, weapons that you'd released with previous elite specs. Give me a Necro with Greatsword again, but then make the Shroud work differently so it's basically Reaper, but then it's not because the Shroud becomes a different sort of thing. I don't know, but I think there are options. I hope they do not go away from elite specs entirely. Which now again brings me to Icebrood Saga. Because if I told you, and literally the way Icebrood Saga was described to the players, is expansion quality content in a living world season. And if you look at what we're being told we will get with one of these baby expansions, it more or less sounds like Icebrood Saga. What are we going to get? 3 open world maps, 2 to 3 strike missions, 1 new fractal, a few new masteries, and some new rewards and systems. There it is. It's Icebrood Saga. What we are being sold 100% appears to be Icebrood Saga for the foreseeable future. The difference is we're going to pay an expansion fee for it. So if ArenaNet just came right out and replied to, in my Twitch chat now, or replied to the video when I throw this bad boy up on YouTube and was like, hey, you are 100%, dude, you got it, and so did everyone else who's probably saying the exact same thing. I haven't watched Teapot's video on the topic. I haven't watched. I did watch the first 3 minutes of Wooden Potatoes video last night, but I was distracted by some other stuff. If they're saying the exact same thing, which they probably are because they're smart folks, everyone's figured it out. It's Icebrood Saga. Buckle up for a whole bunch more Icebrood Saga. Would I still buy it? For my main account. Would I buy it on alt accounts? On a long enough timeline. Or maybe on one of them, and then the next one I would do on a different alt account, something like that. But if there's no elite specs to compel me to get it on every account, and the masteries are as substandard. Thanks for killing my spiders, bro. And I was just talking earlier about how that doesn't happen in Guild Wars 2. I'll kill your spiders. Ah, you like that? Yeah. We're spider stealing now. If it gives me as little as, because there was nothing about Icebrood Saga that set it apart. As I mentioned earlier, Electromagnetic Pulse is literally the only thing about Icebrood Saga that would compel me on an alt account to play through it at all, unless I really enjoy the story. So, would I pay for that? Again, not on an alt account, I don't think so. On a main account, yeah. I want the new story, I want the experience, I want to see what it is that they've created and what they're doing, and I want to try it out. Give it a whirl. So, I'm not the only person in the world with an alt account, and the folks with alt accounts are serious players, right? But what about the casual players who making the choice between new content in a different game or a different game on Steam altogether? Maybe there's a really cool game on Steam, that's only $20, and they're making the decision between this new baby expansion that Guild Wars 2 has and that game, or some new content in Elder Scrolls Online, something like that. With what we're being sold right now, are they going to make that decision to go with Guild Wars 2? I don't know. I don't know. So that's really where I really wanted to go with this conversation, is that paragraph where they tell us what we're going to be getting, and when you actually parse through it and you realize that list of things is not on a 3-month basis, but is the entirety of the cycle, and that there's no promises that the cycle will in fact only be a year, and there's no mention of elite specs. We're not clear on how many mastery tracks it'll be and how many you can even support with only 3 maps over however long that cycle is. I just don't think that we're getting as much as maybe folks thought we were when we first read through the studio release. We owe it to ourselves to continue to read through the studio release, though. Right? We owe it owe it to ourselves to finish the release, because maybe there will be some more there that does give us cause for optimism. And at the end of the day, I'm not gonna walk away from Guild Wars 2 because of the studio release. Like, I can't do it anymore. I'm off to play whatever else. If I want to play whatever else, I will, because it's good, not because Guild Wars 2 is bad. Because Guild Wars 2 is not necessarily bad. All right, so let's see what else they have to say. Okay, spring roadmap. So having said all that, having told us what the future is going to look like, what about over the next couple months? And they're going to give that to us. All right, the next chapter of Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons arrives on February 28th. With familiar allies like Detective Rama and his hat at your side, thank God his hat's coming along, you'll travel to a new location in Cantha, come face to face with a deadly foe that resides deep within the Jade Sea. I'm taking a break from the paragraph. I assume that is, because we always assumed that the Deep Sea Dragon was what drove the Crate away, and the terror in the deep that was such a problem over in Cantha or whatever. And like these things were, were certainly like my assumptions at least, and I don't think I was the only person who's kind of working off that premise for what all that meant. And then it turns out that Suwan was like the good dragon, right? Like, hey, we love Suwan. Like, up until she got corrupted, like she was a force for good. So whatever that thing was, whatever that terror of the deep that drove away the Crate and whatever else it, all these problems that it caused in Cantha, that was something else. So it sounds like we are going to confront whatever that is. Hey, I'm good with that. I'm good with that for a lot of reasons, right? It's a loose end in terms of their lore that we get to tie up. It could make for some really interesting content. It's not a dragon, but it is dire. I like it. My only concern is, please do not give me like an entire underwater map. Please don't do that. I get it. Mechanics have been put in place to make underwater a little more viable with the underwater infusions. But hey, you might stock up on those. I don't know. That's pure speculation on my part, but maybe. And of course the skimmer can go underwater, so lots of reasons to think underwater is more viable than it used to be, or more satisfying than it used to be. But I still want nothing to do with an all underwater map. Never mind like an all underwater release. You can get out of here with that. That's some nonsense, and I ain't having nothing to do with it. That would be more likely to push me away from the game than everything I've discussed thus far. All right, anyway, back to that. Deadly foe, deep in the Jade Sea. Now, Jade Sea, so they don't have to go underwater, right? The Jade Sea is still solid in large portions of it. So it doesn't have to be swimming and that nonsense. That storyline will conclude a few months later with an update that introduces additional playable space to the map. Okay, so we've seen this a number of times, including in Icebreed Saga, maps that expand versus new maps. Okay, it's more space. That's cool. Adds made events and boss encounters and lays the groundwork for future to be announced adventures. Okay, so there is not going to be another Living World season. It sounds like to me. We're going to get like an abbreviated version. We're going to get some more story here, and it sounds like there's going to be one map, but it's going to expand, a la Silver Waste, Drizzlewood. What's the other one? Bajora Marches or whatever it's called. It sounds like we're going to get, again, man, it's Icebreed Saga. Like, that's what we're getting, Icebreed Saga. All right, so so time now. Like, there is no more Living World. If you were looking forward to the next Living World season, which I was, adjust your expectations, because it does not sound like that's what's going to happen. Instead, we're going to get like a shortened thing here. It sounds like, and then they want to enter into this cadence. Possibly after a bit of a delay, because we don't know where they're at in terms of development on that. Maybe they're remarkably close. Like, maybe they are doing amazing things over there. They're capable of it. They have very skilled developers. They're capable of it, but whether they are or not, I don't know. Unlike a Living World release, all owners of Guild Wars 2 End of Dragons will gain access to this content. Okay, so there it is that I was talking about earlier. This thing where you got to log in and make sure you're there for it or whatever, which I thought was a very reasonable, logging in once every 3 months, and that was when their release cadence was at its fastest. They never achieved that again after Living World Season 3. Even Season 4 was more like 4 months at its best. But logging in once every 3 months to get free content to me never felt like this horrible ask on the part of the studio. But all right, so that's done now. No gem cost for missed stuff. You buy that cycle, you get that whole cycle, and that's cool too though. That's good marketing, and kind of lines it up. It aligns better with what other studios are doing. All right, in the first half of the year, we'll release Suwon Legendary Weapon Skin. So that's people seem to really be enjoying these dragon legendaries. I have no interest in them at all. Even on my main account, I have not had the slightest bit of interest. In fact, on the contrary, I've decided that Exordium will be the next legendary I pursue on my main account. I'll probably start that pretty soon here in the near future. It is really just a question of whether or not I want to do the gift of battle, how I feel about that. I just have not been falling all over myself. And actually, we'll talk a whole bunch about World vs. World here in just a second. I've not been falling all over myself to play World vs. World. I understand the rewards are increased, but that for me doesn't, like, I kind of don't care. So gift of battle, like, do I want to do that or not? That'll decide whether or not I craft Exordium here soon. 2 profession balance updates. Okay, good. A new fractal. That is actually pretty exciting. Like I said, we've had 2 new fractals over the last 4 years. That is not really, for a game mode that is still very much alive and still really kind of central to Guild Wars 2. Like man, do not. I can't believe that they have neglected fractals the way they have, considering how significant that game mode is to the game. Like, man, I mean, that's a really popular game. So I am glad that they are adding another fractal, and that's great. I look forward to it. I was out of fractals for a long time. My 0-0 playthrough really shoved me back into them, and I'm enjoying getting back into them. I played Sunqua Peak for the second time the other day, but this time, instead of being carried by a whole bunch of people who knew it well, it was a whole bunch of people who had no idea what they were doing. It did not go nearly as well, but it was good to get more of a feel for that one, so that when I am with a little bit stronger group, I can at least carry my own weight. So, that was a good thing, albeit a little bit painful because no one knew what they were doing. All right, so yes, new fractal. And multiple updates for World vs. World. Okay. Let's take a moment to talk about that too, because so they did just update some World vs. World stuff, right? They've updated the rewards in World vs. World. I have yet to try that out, so I don't know how good it is. I have heard that it is like meaningful, that the difference is noticeable. I think that's great, but the game mode needs improvement. And this, hey man, and this kind of leads us back to when I mentioned all the way back at the beginning of when I first started my rambling here.
Another personal victory.
About how in the past we've been told things before about how they're going to improve the game, and they're gonna, we're finally taking this seriously, guys. Like, we're gonna do a good job. We're gonna start taking good care of the game. Well, we've heard that before, and World vs. World is probably the most egregious area where they continue to tell us that they're going to make positive changes, and they don't. It really... So I was never a fan of linking. I thought linking was absolutely awful. It was an extremely short-sighted solution to a problem that required a much more comprehensive approach, and it was destructive to the community. I'm going to get my ass kicked here. It was destructive towards communities that had been built through Guild Wars 2, or through World vs. World play. It was just, I thought it was bad all the way around. I don't want to die anymore. I've decided that's not where I want to be in life. But to my point right now, what people forget about linking is that we were told when it was rolled out, when it was introduced, that it was a temporary solution. That temporary solution has now lasted twice as long as World versus World did in its original form. In other words, when servers like were their own thing. Twice as long that temporary fix has lasted. 7 years that temporary fix has been around, or close to it. I'd have to go back and check the exact date, but it's in the ballpark of 7 years. 7 years for a temporary fix. It's been over 4, close to 5 years, I think, since the idea of, let's say 4.5, since the idea of alliances was initially thrown out there. And then it was immediately abandoned. Now, I kind of like alliances in that it makes the community aspect of it relevant again. So World versus World guilds will become more relevant than ever. And already, I really think it's I don't want to say the right way because that would be kind of silly, but I think it's the best way to enjoy World versus World is in a guild, which is a big part of the reason I'm not playing World versus World anymore. But I did have a guild that I did enjoy the game mode with at one point in time, and alliances would make those guilds like really relevant, right? Years we've been waiting on this alliance thing now. What about that third Borderlands map? Remember when that was 100% going to be part of this whole solution, World vs. World, and they care about World vs. World, and hey, we're going to get a third Borderlands map, and that's going to kind of make the desert map thing like make more sense, and hey, there are reasons to like this. Nah, man, that's dead. Third Borderlands map, dead. I challenge ArenaNet to pull that out of their ass and show it to us at some point in time. I mean, by all means, like, make me look stupid, because I don't think they're going to. I mean, I make myself look stupid on a pretty regular basis, but I don't think ArenaNet's capable of it. So here we go. In the near future, this spring, updates to World vs. World. Multiple updates to World vs. World. So we have seen the Alliance beta. So I to be clear, I'm not doubting. I'm not saying that alliances is not going to happen, that the alliance thing is not coming. I'm just saying that I have no reason to believe, based on the evidence that we've had historically, I have no reason to believe that they're actually going to make substantive improvements to World vs. World on like a regular basis, or in fact that they're capable of like really making significant substantive improvements to World vs. World at all. Let alone on a regular basis. Maybe they are, though. We'll see. If they do, it'll be the first time. Because linking was not a substantive improvement. Linking was server merging. 100%. They just didn't want to commit to that because they knew how angry players would be about it. And somehow they felt like if they could just repackage server merging, that was a better solution than addressing the overpopulation of servers that were a detriment to the game mode in the first place. Imagine if that had just been the solution. To just address the fact that everyone, that basically the equivalent of all the Los Angeles Lakers fans in the game, because really it's the same mentality, right? Like I would rather be a winner than be loyal to anything or stand out in any way. All those people had gone to one server, and that server was so grossly overpopulated that the game mode was irreparable. And their solution was to try to make other servers resemble that. Unbelievable. That game mode has been so mismanaged by a studio that doesn't understand its own game. It boggling. Now, current game director Josh Davis does seem to have, for a long time he was involved in the World vs. World stuff, and does seem to have a pretty solid understanding of what he wants the game mode to look like, and he takes it seriously. So if we're ever going to see an improvement there, you would think it would be now, right? But don't tell me what you're going to do right. Show me what you're going to do right. Because you've told me a lot of things over the years, and you've failed again and again and again. So Show me. But yes, on the horizon. Improvements for World vs. World. Quality TBD. To be determined. Additionally, they're going to finish rolling out DirectX 11 and Chromium Embedded Framework. Hopefully that includes improvements on some of the things that don't work real well, like, man, the trading post like never seems to work right anymore. Like, it just seems like it is broke. Maybe they never anticipated the amount of, like, just total stuff changing hands, and maybe whatever backbone this is built upon just isn't working well anymore because it's just like the sheer amount of stuff. But man, that thing just works like trash. So I'm 100% like not a I'm not a programmer. I'm just not. So I don't know what goes into that, and I don't know if some of these things. I know DirectX 11 won't have any impact on it, but I don't know if the Chromium embedded framework, if that can be used to improve the trade post or not. But boy, am I hoping. I'm hoping. That is speculation. I mean, if isn't that what we do on YouTube? Speculate, right? Okay, so I'm going to speculate. And of course, run the usual events or festivals and bonus events. Well, that's I mean, hey, great. Thank you for telling me that you're going to do what the bare minimum of what you were expected to do. But that's going to be happening as well. They have some quality of life updates in the works, including a long requested feature that will allow you to queue up for PvE maps when they are full. I do like that. That is a real quality of life feature. If you watched my 0 to 0 playthrough, I don't know if I ever captured it on like the YouTube videos, probably not, but if you were the one person who was watching it on Twitch, you might have seen that there were a number of times when we kind of brute forced our way onto maps. I use the term brute force, and it's really an incorrect. We spammed our way onto maps that were full to take part in meta events. Presumably there was a queue, and we just repeatedly until we came to the we continued to try and enter the map until finally we were first in the queue, or until finally someone had left, or I don't know how that process works right now. But it'll be a lot more transparent once the queue concept is introduced, and you can try to get onto a Suwon map or a Dragon Stand or a whatever that map, Dragonfall, that you believe is going to succeed if you're on a dead map. That's good for everybody. That's a huge quality of life improvement. So good for them. So here's a high-level look at our upcoming releases. So what are we actually getting? Well, February 14th, balance update, World vs. World rewards, stuff like that. Well, and the Chromium Embedded Framework upgrade. Okay. So maybe it won't affect the trade post because armor. I don't know. It does seem to be going a little faster. The real riddle though is when I try to sell something. That's when things always bog down. Yeah, but I see no change in the UI, so I don't know that it is going to affect the trade post. Doesn't look that way, right? But those things happened on the 14th, and that was the day after this came out on the 13th, so that would have been the next day. Those things did happen. They're in the past now. 28th, so a week and a half from now, the new Guild Wars 2 Ended Dragons stuff. I'm looking forward to it. I just wonder what the future looks like, because now I know it's not going to be Living World. It's going to be something else. But new story, new map, fun things. Looking forward to it. March 28th, Super Adventure Box. April 18th, DirectX 11. Finally, finished with that upgrade. And then May 2nd is the next balance patch. So things happening in the future. So February 28th, last day of February. So all of March, all of April, all of May. So come June, July, I'm going to start getting real curious, and I'm going to want to see, this summer, I'm going to want to see a new roadmap to kind of help me understand what the future is going to look like, because, our 3-month cadence, which, again, has never really been a thing since Season 3, but, we will have had that additional End of Dragon stuff out for a minute. So I'm going to want to know more information then about their new thing. The ambiguity that exists right now isn't going to be, acceptable forever. It's not going to be acceptable by then. And then in the background, they'll quietly be working on what's to come. Okay, so the wrap up. This is a wrap up for their studio update. It's going to be the wrap up for me too. They're excited about the next phase of Guild Wars 2. Well, I'm not. I'm intrigued. I'm interested to see what will happen. I'm skeptical that it's going to be as good as some people seem to think it's going to be. I actually believe it's just going to be a whole lot more Icebreed Saga, but maybe I'm wrong. I am accepting of the fact that that's probably what the future is, and that maybe I just need to find like some other things that I also enjoy if Guild Wars 2 isn't going to give me quite as much. And that's okay, man. Like, I kind of want to play Stellaris right now, to be honest. I'm not saying that like I'm that disgusted by the studio update. I just kind of have the itch to play Stellaris at the moment. But I'm glad they're excited. They should be. It's their product, right? So they should be excited. The changes they've outlined will allow them to provide a better experience to their fans, to provide new content more consistently, and ensure that Guild Wars 2 will be around for many, many years to come. So let's close out by taking a look at like that last sentence. If in fact this new system puts them in a position to prolong the life of the game, I am more willing to accept it. If that is actually like the exchange, right? If the exchange is, hey man, you need to settle for a little bit less, but we're trying to increase the lifespan of the game from the next few years, might be it before we go into maintenance, to we believe this game can continue to be pushing new content for 10 more years, and then that is more than enough time to further develop the IP. If those are my two decisions, I will take the Icebreed Saga model for 10 more years, and I probably won't be alive in 10 years, but like whatever the case may be, like, all right, I'm on board with that. Like, you have me convinced now. Whether or not that's the case, I don't know. So, in summary for me, that's the end of what they were saying. They wrap it up. We'll see you in game, Josh Davis. In summary for me, people really need to curb their enthusiasm on more regular expansions, all the fractals. Man, you ain't getting what you seem to think. You need to reread it. What we're getting is, I think we're getting a whole lot more Icebreed Saga. Icebreed Saga was not the worst thing to ever happen in the game. It's worth noting that prior to the conclusion of Icebreed Saga, there was some good storytelling. The early and middle portion of Icebreed Saga was decent storytelling. There were also some things that did. I thought the dragon response missions were not good. I don't know what they were. I don't know what the goal was there with those, but whatever. But there were some good things in Icebreed Saga. If that's the model they're going to go to, they really need to find a way to like make the masteries good, and they need to fill the void left by elite specs. They have to do something to fill that void. It doesn't have to be elite specs, I guess, because if that's just not viable, like in terms of the man hours dedicated to it and stuff, fine. But fill that void somehow, and then maybe we're more accepting of it, right?
Just one more confirmation of how
We'll see.
great I am.
We'll see what the future. I am looking forward to the 28th, right? Because I want to see what the new map's all about. I want to see what the new content's all about. And if this is, in fact, the initial phase of the new system that they're talking about, then maybe we'll get some indications of that on the 28th. If we see some sort of different combat mechanic that can be adapted in different ways by different classes, then maybe we'll look and say, hey, this might be a foreshadowing of what's going to replace Elite Specs. I don't expect it, but I also don't rule it out as a possibility, right? So I am not optimistic, but I'm open to the possibility that we do have good things on the horizon. I just think that by June at the latest, the studio is going to need to fill some of these gaps. Some of these things that we are not clear on right now, I think that they're really going to have to find a way to provide a little bit of clarity. Because without that, people are going to continue to ask these questions, and they're going to provide their own answers. Much like I have been for the last however long I've been running my mouth. People are going to do that. So the studio is going to want to provide some answers before that gets out of control. We'll see if they will or not. All right, well, I appreciate you hanging out with me. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. And hopefully, in less than 2 weeks, we'll have a little clarity, right? So between now and then, I'll see you in game. We'll continue working on our story playthrough, and hopefully have a great time. Thank you. Later.